recently, about a little less than a year ago, I came out officially as no longer a Christian. So I formally apostatized from the Christian religion, although I'm still a theist.
That was how Tyler introduced himself in a debate against Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy. The debate was on the question of divine hiddenness. The problem of divine hiddenness is an objection lodged against theism due to the alleged absence of evidence of God's existence. If God did exist, why doesn't he make himself more known? The line of objection has been developed by John Schellenberg, an atheist philosopher. For followers of Veracity Hill, you might recall that a couple of my conversations with Paulogia were about this topic. Tyler says that divine hiddenness was the final issue for him that led him to give up being a Christian.
When I deconverted, the divine hiddenness was the linchpin.
A linchpin is an odd analogy to use when talking about deconverting. A linchpin helps to keep an axle in place. A better and more well-known analogy would have been something like divine hiddenness was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Nevertheless, Tyler places this objection to Christian theism as the critical one that led to his departure from the faith. It's because this objection was very personal to him. He describes having a dark night of the soul experience, a reference to a 16th century poem by Catholic priest John of the Cross. The term is used to describe a crisis of faith, when he believed that God was nowhere to be found in his suffering. Tyler believes that he was the only agent putting in effort in a relationship with God, and that God was not reciprocating.
But should I have to fight for a relationship with God, especially if the promises are true that he is to be our comforter, our rock, our place of great shelter, the lover of our souls?
This absence of the Christian God's presence in his life led him to reflect upon a number of issues, including religious language about God as Father and his own relationship with his children.
But when it's pitched as a relationship with a loving Father, that language about God, even though it's analogical, still has to grasp onto something. It still has to track to an analogical concept. And I started looking at my relationship with my children as sons, and I started looking at things like Luke 11, where you have statements that, even though you're evil, you still know how to give good gifts to your children. So the analog between God as a loving Father and me as a father should be direct. Still an analog, but it should still be direct. And started looking around at the way that God was hidden, especially to his own people, his own children, whether or not you're a Calvinist or non-Calvinist, his own people, Christians, believers, on all accounts are his children. And yet God is hidden in ways that we wouldn't expect if God was a loving Father in a meaningful sense. Right? Imagine that my sons came to me and they said, they didn't even come to me, they came to other people and they said, we don't even know that our dad loves us. We don't experience his love. He's not around. He doesn't always provide for us. We don't think that he loves us. And because that, we're going to go wander into the freeway and get hit by oncoming traffic.
Tyler analogizes his experience of God like a child who has a deadbeat dad, a father who does not provide for his kids, who is not around, and whose children believe that they are not loved by him. And so these children decide, for some inexplicable reason, to go commit suicide.
And because that, we're going to go wander into the freeway and get hit by oncoming traffic.
This is a weak analogy for several reasons. First, Tyler fails to describe in fuller detail what the Christian view is on God as a provider. Had he done that, it might have been apparent that Tyler wanted God to act a specific way in a specific circumstance. In this regard, secondly, Tyler makes God a subject of Tyler's own moral standard. Third, this is not actually an argument for divine hiddenness, but divine neglect. Note that in the analogy, the Father does in fact exist, and even the children know that the Father exists. They have evidence that the Father exists, but it's simply that the children don't perceive they are loved by the Father. So this makes it more an argument for divine neglect. It's not that the children don't know their dad does not exist. That would be the hiddenness equivalent. In fact, the children, again, could deduce that they have a human father. The analogy describes how their father is not loving them. So again, this is not an analogy for divine hiddenness. It also happens to be a weak argument for divine neglect, including the non sequitur by the children, and that beyond its function as an internal critique against Christianity, it doesn't solve the existential crisis Tyler has, because he still claims to be a theist. So how does this argument get him out of the concern? It doesn't. He still has the concern to deal with. Above, you heard him describe what a deadbeat dad is like. In that debate, Tyler was confronted with a tweet he made on Father's Day of 2023 about referring to the God of the Bible as a deadbeat dad. Here are those tweets. In a shocking fashion, Tyler outright denies using that language.
I'm not going to try to make it polemical and say absentee or deadbeat or anything like that. I've seen some of those in the comments. I'm not trying to say, oh, the Christian God is a deadbeat dad, or like that. That's not it. It's just, I mean, that's not my rhetoric. So, like, if people say that's not my claim.
As of the recording of this video, in July of 2024, the tweet is still on his profile. The evidence strongly suggests that Tyler was straight-faced lying. Tyler's denial is a classic form of gaslighting. He made the tweet. He knew he made the tweet. He was reminded that he made the tweet, and he still denied using that type of language. Tyler's denial is a classic form of gaslighting, which is to manipulate a person or people into questioning their own perception of reality, and consequently their sanity. It's an odd psychological coping mechanism, but there it is for you to see how it happens, and we'll look at it in further detail later. Tyler makes other tweets about how Yahweh is depicted as a deadbeat dad, or worse, in the scriptures.
I understand that saying God is father is anthropomorphic language, because it's not like he birthed us, but there's conceptual overlap between those two things, right? That makes the analogy work. If unloving can be loving, there's no conceptual overlap. I don't even know what the analogy means anymore.
Tyler is correct that this is analogical language. What it means includes the belief that God has so ordered the universe that we should be grateful for all the good gifts we obtain, and that the trials we go through are not so hard that we cannot overcome them with God's help. It doesn't mean that the Christian God will give us whatever we want, even what we think is best in any given circumstance. Any human father knows that. My kids would be spoiled brats and their character immature if that were the case. It also does not mean that God will always provide relief from instances of suffering. Sometimes suffering is for our benefit, to build moral character. And Tyler once knew this.
Whatever the reason it might be why you might be suffering, we might not know what that good thing is. Sometimes it's very opaque what that good thing is, and we may not ever learn it this side of heaven. Who knows? But whatever the reason is, it cannot be, the reason cannot be that God does not love you.
That's Tyler delivering a sermon in November of 2019. The sermon is titled, A Plan for Suffering. And it's quite the opposite approach to suffering. Instead of following his own teaching and advice, he went completely contrary to it. Finally, when Christians say that God is like a loving father, it does not mean that God will free us from the logical consequences of our immoral behavior. In Tyler's debate with Michael Jones, Jones pressed Tyler on the issue that what Tyler was presenting was more about evil and suffering. Tyler then granted that hiddenness and suffering are two sides of the same coin. Listen to this explanation.
In theodicies and answers to divine hiddenness is it's the bump in the rug, right? Once one pushes down, it pops up over in suffering, and so you say, okay, well now we're getting over this problem of suffering. I'm saying, okay, fine, but that seems to be the correlate, right? So if I push down this objection to hiddenness, well, sure, it becomes a problem of suffering, but that's because, like, hiddenness is only a problem because there is suffering, and so it seems that there's no escape then from that.
By Tyler's own admission, the issue of divine hiddenness is related to suffering. So why was Tyler suffering? What event in his life caused this dark night of the soul between the summer of 2020 and spring of 2022?